Okay, so this is going to be a reading of Act 1, Scene 2, and this takes place near King Duncan's palace, and it's actually in a military camp in Forres. So if we take a look at this map that we've looked at in class, Forres is at the very north of Scotland, slightly to the east of Inverness. So if you're looking at your screen, it should be to the right of Inverness at the top there. So a summary of this scene. The valiant and worthy Macbeth is established in 2 reports of different battles delivered to King Duncan. Duncan orders the traitorous thane of Cawdor to be executed and grants his title to Macbeth. Now, this action of Duncan is really going to be impactful because it's going to be the first thing that makes Macbeth start to believe the witches when they give him 3 prophecies. So when we meet the witches in the next scene, they're going to hail Macbeth 3 times. The first time they're going to hail him as thane of Glamis. The second time they're going to hail him as thane of Cawdor, and the third time they're going to hail him as king hereafter. So we'll find out that Macbeth has always been thane of Glamis. He inherited that from his father, who we find out has died. And when the king orders Cawdor to be executed, he sends 2 of his men, Ross and Angus, to go and tell Macbeth that he's now thane of Cawdor. And this so happens to occur just after the witches hail him. And this makes Macbeth believe fully that he could be king hereafter, just like they said. Before I begin, a quick rundown of characters. This picture will represent King Duncan, and this man will represent his eldest son and to-be heir of Scotland, Prince Malcolm. This picture will represent the badly wounded soldier who first brings news of Macbeth's deeds. This picture will represent the nobleman Lennox, who is already with King Duncan. And lastly, this picture will represent Ross and Angus, who come in later to bring more news of Macbeth. Only Ross has lines in this scene, so when he speaks, it will zoom in like this. So here the scene begins, and I want you to ignore the British flags and imagine that this is a military camp in medieval Scotland. The stage directions read, "Alarum within. Enter King Duncan, Malcolm, Donalbain, Lennox with attendants, meeting a bleeding captain." "What bloody man is that? He can report, as seemeth by his plight, of the revolt, the new estate." "This is the sergeant, who like a good and hardy soldier fought 'gainst my captivity. Hail, brave friend! Say to the king the knowledge of the broil, as thou didst leave it." "Doubtful it stood, as 2 spent swimmers that do cling together and choke their art. The merciless MacDonald, worthy to be a rebel for that, the multiplying villainies of nature do swarm upon him, from the western isles of kerns and gallow glasses is supplied. And fortune, on his damned cruel smiling, showed like a rebel's whore, but all's too weak for brave Macbeth. Well, he deserves that name, disdaining fortune with his brandished steel, which smote with the bloody execution, like valor's minion, carved out his passage till he faced the slave, which ne'er shook hands nor bade farewell to him, till he unseamed him from the nave to the chops, and fixed his head upon the battlement." "O valiant cousin, worthy gentleman!" "Yes, as sparrows eagles, or the hare's a lion, if I say sooth. I must report they were as cannons overcharged with double cracks. So they doubly redoubled strokes upon the foe, except they meant to bathe in reeking wounds, or memorize another Golgotha. I cannot tell, but I am faint, my gashes cry for help." So well thy words become thee as thy wounds. They smack of honour both. Go, get him to the surgeons. Enter Ross and Angus. Ah, the worthy thane of Ross! What a haste looks through his eyes. So should he look that he seems to speak things strange. God save the king. Whence camest thou, worthy thane? From Fife, great king, where the Norwegian banners flout the sky, and fan our people cold. Norway himself with terrible numbers, assisted by that most disloyal traitor, the thane of Cawdor, began a dismal conflict, till that Bellona's bridegroom, lapped in proof, confronted him with self-comparisons, point against point, rebellious arm against arm, curbing his lavish spirit, and to conclude the victory fell on us. Great happiness! That now, Sweno, the Norway's king, craves composition, nor would we deign him burial of his men till he disbursed at St. Colm's Inch $10,000 to our general use. No more that thane of Cawdor shall deceive our bosom interests. Go, pronounce his present death, and with his former title, Great Macbeth. I'll see it done. What he hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won. So what you'll notice straight away there with those last two lines is that they mirror scene 1 really closely. So you'll remember the line from scene 1 where the witches say, when the battle's lost and won. So there's that exact same phrase there. So having lost something and having won something. Now, it might be a bit more of a reach, but this really closely reflects how Macbeth becomes king. So he becomes king not through winning. And now you'll remember our discussion about history. The real Macbeth from the 11th century, who was a real live king, he became king by winning a battle. And he defeated the real King Duncan, and he was actually quite a good king. Now, in the play, that's the complete opposite. He doesn't win the position of king by winning a battle. He becomes king through the insidious murder under the cover of night, which means he only becomes king, he only wins through a loss, and that is the loss of Duncan. Now, we're going to go through a bit closer some of the important things to note from this scene. Now, this is a bit longer than scene 1, so I'd encourage you to get out your No Fear books, and as I speak, you can go through and you can add some of your own annotations and notes. So the very first thing you might want to do is write a quick summary at the top, and you can pause now to give yourself a chance to do that. It shouldn't be longer than 3 sentences. Okay. So the first thing you'll need to note is the bloody captain. So the fact that he is covered in blood is meant to be a signal of how vicious this battle was. And he has fought so hard for King Duncan that he's bloody beyond recognition. And Malcolm says, King Duncan says, what bloody man is that? So he can't even recognize one of his own soldiers. The next thing to note is the captain's first monologue is quite complicated, but he's basically saying that Macbeth fought really well, and his speech is full of warnings. He says that Macbeth was quite vicious. He said he fought like a minion, and his sword smoked with bloody execution. If you look down past between lines 10 and 20, around line 15, he says, he brandished his steel, which smoked with bloody execution, like Valor's minion, carved out his passage till he faced the slave. And then it talks about him cutting this competing soldier from his belly button, his nape, to his chops, so all the way up through his neck. So it's really a warning that Macbeth overdid it on the battlefield. He fought really brutally, and this really speaks to his character, and that'll come out more and more throughout the play. But Duncan doesn't really listen. He just says, oh, this is my valiant cousin, which reveals that he's related to Macbeth, which might explain Macbeth's title, and he says he's a worthy gentleman. So just going back to the captain's monologue, there are a few phrases that might help you understand this better. Of course, if you've got your No Fear book, you can always read the English side, which is the side without the black box here. But if you do want to understand the Shakespearean English, we'll go through a few phrases. So if we start at line 9, you've got the phrase choke their art. So this is the idea of drowning someone else by hanging on to them. And he's using that as a sort of simile to describe how they fought. When they talk about the multiplying villainies of nature on line 11, that's a reference to lice, and that's another another piece of imagery to describe what people were like. So it's a swarm of lice that's describing the soldiers and how many of them and how they were moving and working together. If we go down, we're looking at line 13. It says the phrase of kerns and gallows glasses is supplied. And this is talking about different types of soldiers. So it's saying that there were foot soldiers and horsemen with axes, and these were supplied by Norway. So to give a bit of a rundown, we have this figure, Macdonald, which is the villain that Macbeth's fighting against, and he started a civil war against the king, King Duncan, and, sorry, my cat's there, and he's used Norway's help to fight this battle. So he's brought in another country to help with this civil war. They talk about and fortune under this, so, which is talking about Lady Luck, the idea like the embodiment of fortune. It says fortune was smiling on this quarrel, on this fight, which is foreshadowing the fact that Macbeth is going to win. They refer to Macbeth as brave Macbeth, and that's a really good simple quote to use and to keep in your bookwork, and it's something that you could probably dot into your analysis later on. It talks about till he faced the slave, that's prefacing his fight with Macdonald. Moving on, we'll go on to page 6. There's reference to skipping kerns on line 30, and that's referring again to the foot soldiers, and the fact that they're skipping means that they retreated. So they saw how easily and viciously Macbeth fought Macdonald and killed him and put his head upon the battlements, and they skipped away. They didn't want to be any part of that. We keep going down. They talk about the Norwegian lord who was in a surveying vantage, so he was sitting out of the battle. He drew in some new supplies of men, and they use the word furbished there, which means fresh. And basically, the captain goes on to describe how even though this new battle, or this reinvigoration of the existing battle started, Macbeth continued to fight valiantly. And it says, when we look down at around line 38, they doubly redoubled strokes upon the foe. So he fought even harder when he could have given up and run. There's the reference at line 40 to Golgotha. So you'll need to make an annotation here. This is a Christian reference. And Golgotha was the place where Christ in Christian mythology is said to have been crucified. And it is shaped like a skull. And that's very famous. That is thought to have fulfilled an old Jewish prophecy that it says that Satan would bite the heel and the heel would bruise the head. So that's an important symbol of blood being all over the head, all over the skull, the idea of bruising. And so they're saying he's recreated a Golgotha. So we've got this imagery of a heel covered in blood. And that's important. It's this bloody imagery that's associated with Macbeth. Then there's a funny little line on line 42 where it says, "My gashes cry for help," and it's a very poetic way for him to say, "I'm bleeding a bit too much, I need to go to the surgeon," and that's where Duncan sends him. When Ross and Angus enter, they're two more Scottish noblemen. As you can gather, that they're allowed so close to the king and that they have a position of importance. And they clearly were also at the battle, so you can imagine they're quite bloody too. And they say straight away, "God save the king," when they talk to the king. And that's really setting up that
these people around King Duncan love him. He's a beloved king, and everybody just hopes for the best for him. And they're saying that they are from Fife. So I'm going to go back to the map now and just remind you where Fife is and how far away this battle that is taking place is. So if we're looking at this map, Fife is south and slightly to the east of Dunsinane. So if you're looking at Dunsinane, look straight down and slightly to the right, and that should give you a bit of a picture of where this battle has been taking place. And you think Ross and Angus, after fighting in this battle, have walked all the way up just to the east of Inverness, near Forest, where this is all taking place. And currently, as this is all taking place as well, Macbeth and Banquo are also making their way back from the battle. Okay, so on page 8, looking at line 54 now, there is a reference to Bellona's bridegroom. And that's a reference to a goddess of war. And that's in reference to the battle, of course. If we go further down at line 61, they're talking about Norway, who was funding this civil war and clearly lost, and the king, who is referred to as Sweno, he had to leave, but before he left, he wanted to bury his men. And lines 61 and 62 are in reference to that, and they made him pay 10,000 gold or dollars or whatever their currency is before he left, so he could bury his dead. And that, of course, made Duncan very happy because that would help do some reparations after this battle has taken place. And then we've already discussed that very last line, what he had lost. Noble Macbeth has won. So that should be the end of scene 2. Now that you've seen scene 1 and scene 2 together, you should be able to do the first section of your booklet work. So feel free to rewatch this or scene 1 to help you and ask any questions you have on Teams online. Thank you.